they'd gone to look for water. Those two comrades were Ernest Mudulo and one comrade called Mampuru from the Northern Transvaal, from Skukuniland. And their disappearance now confirmed our fears that that exchange of fire must have involved them. And that necessitated, urgent preparations on our part to prepare for battle. Then all of a sudden, I think at about 15 hours, there was a rapid fire towards our direction, a bit wild, with frequent shouts calling upon us to surrender. And the call to surrender was followed by shouts that we were surrounded, it was useless to fight, terrorists surrender. Now, those of us who were in command now said, look, chaps, nobody is allowed to pull the trigger before the target is properly identified and seen. There must be a clear economy of ammunition. We don't know how these battles are going to last. We have no supplies. So every bullet is precious. So there must be no panicky firing back. Now they continued firing and clearly worried about our silence. There was deafening silence, a lot of tension. You must remember this was the first experience of a battle. None of us had ever been fired at. And I can tell you, it was frightening because these bullets were passing very close to us, over our heads. And I remember some comrades actually panicked, and there was one who came to say to us that he was wounded, and we discovered that he was not wounded, he was just panicking. But the arrogant enemy stood up to say, one of them said, where are they? Can you see them? They had thrown caution to the wind, and I suppose they thought that we're scared. And our comrades said in Zulu, Nanguya. And man, our fellows just opened almost at the same time and shot two of them. And fortunately, the guys they shot were the commanders. And you see, a regular army, unlike a guerrilla army, depends on a commander. The commander is the key person. When the commander is, killed or wounded and is unable to command, you see, the morale of the regular army is affected. So there was a lot of panic on their part, and they began to run away. Then we began now to chase them and to really, dispel the attack. We neutralized the attack. And we discovered, you see, for the first time that, look, we are dealing with people who are also very afraid. Because in running away, they left behind their weapons, their supplies of ammunition, food, and everything. I mean, that is sort of a very undisciplined way of retreating. You see, you don't retreat and leave behind your guns, you see, because how are you going to fight again? So they ran away in a very disorderly manner. And that was our first baptism of fire. We're baptized now. We're stronger. We had, the fear was gone. No, the nervousness, the throbbing of the heart against the ribs disappeared. You see, we're all unnerved now. We're very cool and determined. But again, we had not been eating well for a very long time. So this was a welcome supply of food for us. The masses on the ground had not been organized to receive us and to give us the necessary support in terms of intelligence, in terms of protecting us, in terms of giving us regular meals, and in terms of guiding us generally within Rhodesia itself. It was clear that we had a responsibility to save the detachment. It would have been wrong militarily to fight to the last man. We had beaten back the Rhodesian forces a number of times. We never lost a battle. And every time we beat them back, but we also suffered a few casualties. Probably 6 to 7 comrades who died there. And after thorough examination of what suddenly shocked us, the openness of the terrain as we moved towards Plumtree, towards the Matabeleland, with no trees except some shrubs and no mountains. We felt that now we're beginning to be a sitting duck in terms of the enemy's planes. The planes of the enemy had bombed us twice. I mean, the jets and the helicopters. And that sort of compelled us to take a decision to retreat to Botswana in order to build up our forces, to re-establish, as well as to re-establish contact with headquarters in Lusaka. That we did, I mean, in terms of retreating to Botswana. But unknown to us, Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe had been, pulled into the question of looking for us. Of course, probably different motives. Rhodesia and South Africa definitely to search and destroy. Botswana to identify us and arrest us and negotiate with the ANC about our presence. So when we went to Botswana, after a few days, we were discovered. There was a difference amongst us as to whether we should resist arrest and fight back. There was a strong feeling that, we should not allow these fellows to capture us. But there was also a strong feeling that, look, Botswana is an independent African state, a member of the OAU, and that fighting them would create problems for the ANC mission to never be understood by our people if we had a situation where Botswana soldiers were killed in action against us. So ultimately, we agreed that let us surrender. After we had been assured by the Botswana officers that they were under pressure from South Africa and that we wouldn't be imprisoned, we would just, be allowed would be sent back to Zambia. So after some time then we surrendered. But they never kept their word. I think they were under pressure from South Africa. They were afraid. I mean, clearly the government was afraid. They had a small army, small police force, which could never stand up to the bullies in Pretoria. So the price they had to pay was actually to imprison us. We were sentenced to long terms of imprisonment, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. And we served sentences in the Gaborone maximum security jail. I was a militant and angry young man. I wanted to go back and fight after resting for a few months. I found our movement totally unprepared for the continuation of the armed struggle in South Africa. That was my reading of the situation. Of course, there were reasons that they were put forward. I found a lot of preoccupation with solidarity work, with international work. And I found a lot of demoralization amongst our chaps who were in camps in Zambia. And I began to agitate for the resumption of the armed struggle, for seriousness on the part of the leadership. I'm using the word seriousness because in my own view, and this was a subjective point of view, that they were not serious. And I became part of the writing of a memorandum which was very critical of the leadership. Well, that memorandum put us into some trouble. The leadership was angry. They thought our attacks were unfounded and irrational. And some of them felt that our attacks bordered on insubordination and on mutiny. We were suspended from the organization. But that memorandum brought about a lot of heated discussion within the ANC. The need to have a conference, the need to work out a clearer strategy of struggle, of revolutionary struggle. And ironically, there was the Morogoro Conference. We were excluded from the Morogoro Conference because we were regarded as rebels. But I'm able to say that Morogoro Conference ushered in serious discussions which led to for the first time to the formulation of a clear strategy about the waging of a revolutionary war in the country, of a people's war, the need to build the underground, the need for propaganda, the need for mass mobilization. So, despite the fact that, I sort of suffered as a co-author of the document in terms of isolation, in terms of suspension, but I felt that I was going to to accept any sort of punishment, because I told the people, though some of them thought that I was a traitor, that
with the ever escalating tension between South Africans, mainly of Africans of black race, I'm talking about the natives, the tension between us and the foreign nationals, especially our African brothers and sisters. What gets to be thrown in the face of South Africans is that during apartheid, these African countries opened their doors to South Africans and assisted South Africa or South Africans to fight apartheid. But are they telling the truth? Are they revealing the whole truth? Or is this just a case of blackmailing South Africans so that we do not take our African brothers and sisters to task for the crimes they are committing in South Africa, for destroying South Africa? It's important that we take them to task as well, to say, but when South Africans were living in those African countries, they were not committing the kind of activities that they are committing in South Africa. South Africans were not peddling drugs, we're not hijacking, we're not raping, we're not pimping their women. So it is important that we take things into context. So it has to be understood that we are not finding ourselves in a situation where we are being blackmailed, so that we keep quiet, we don't raise our voice against the crime that is being perpetrated by Africans in this country. Thank you guys for tuning in. My name is Tebos Kosana. The name of the platform is Izula Bansundu, the voice for Africans. Kamakuma Africa.